is burn. Good morning, and I hope the
Okay.
rest of the day is as good. ठीक है चलो again a very interesting question. Guidance company requirement is discuss the reasons why an entity may choose a particular accounting policy where an IFRS standard allows an accounting policy choice and whether faithful representation and comparability are affected by such choices. ठीक है. Management's intention and motivation will often influence accounting information. However, corporate financial statements necessarily depend on estimates and judgment. Financial statements are intended to be comparable, but their analysis may not be the most accurate way to judge the performance of any particular company. This lack of comparability may be due to different accounting policy choices or deliberate manipulation. Can you tell me, before we answer this question, I want to hear from you five areas where an accounting policy choice is allowed. ठीक है? Manav, let's start with you.
So 5 areas were accounting policy.
You have to tell me one area where you have a choice in terms of what accounting policy you want to take up. Gwyneth, is there?
Change in provisioning,
What provision?
bad debt provision,
Bad
provision
debt
for
provision.
expense, not bad debt, sorry, provision for
Elaborate, please. I think the first area that should come to your mind is IAS 16, property, plant, and equipment. How to measure non-current assets, subsequent measurement. Either you can use the cost model or you can use the revaluation model. That is area one. Area two is IAS 40,
Depreciation.
investment property. Cost, historical cost approach or the fair value model. What would you choose between the two? Then one more area.
IFRS 9.
IFRS 9. What exactly in IFRS 9?
The financial assets are FVTPL or FVTOCI, depending on the business model. The management might not use the correct business model.
That's an error. The thing is, do we have a choice? Do we have two different accounting treatments allowed for the same item? The choice between whether to go for fair value through P&L or fair value through OCI depends upon the intention behind holding that instrument, right? So that's not exactly a policy choice. Although in some cases it might be, but in most cases it isn't. Yes, Shreya?
Sir, IFRS 9 fair value through P&L or amortization cost?
Again, that depends upon the intention behind holding the debt instrument, right? If you are holding the debt instrument in order to collect the contractual cash flows, then you use the in that case we'll use the amortized cost approach. When the intention is to trade the instrument, then we have to go for fair value through P&L. Policy choice, see, that is a rule, that is not a choice. Choice is when you can do this also, you can do that also. It depends upon your specific circumstance. Yes, Shreya.
Sir, for depreciation, we want to go for SLM or WDV, we can choose that now.
Actually, choosing between these is more of an accounting estimate, less of an accounting policy choice. Because the method of depreciation ideally should depend upon the pattern of usage of the asset. Any other area, एक एक accounting standard सोचो where you,
IAS 2
On the
for weighted
consolidation,
Inventory
average.
valuation.
yes, Roshan,
Valuation.
IS, which one?
IS to inventory valuation, whether to go for FIFO weighted average method or average cost.
Maybe methods of estimating cost, although that also ideally should depend upon the type of inventory you have. But ठीक है, to a certain extent, maybe. Gautam, you were saying something?
Yeah, sir, I told this.
Same
IAS 2.
thing. Okay. Any other standard?
sir, on the consolidation of the intermediary subsidiaries or the parent?
Yes. 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 That could be one area. Whether you decide to consolidate that or whether the intermediate parent decides not to go for console. That's a choice. Very good. Any other area where you think of a choice, think about it. But this question is about that. ठीक है. Second part of the question, usefulness to investors of the ROE ratio and its component parts provided above, and calculate these ratios for the years ended 31 December 2005, 31 December 2006. These calculations must be based on the information provided to you in Table 1. Discuss the impact that the setting up of the special purpose entity and miscellaneous transactions have had on ROE and its component parts. Given these considerations, adjust Table 1 and recalculate the ROE for 2006, thereby making it more comparable to the ROE of 2005. Now, first of all, let's answer this question. Discuss the reasons why an entity may choose a particular accounting policy where an IFRS standard allows an accounting policy choice. They are asking you cost model be allowed hai, fair value model be allowed hai. Why would an entity choose one model over the other? The ideal answer to that is the reason for choosing a particular accounting policy is to reflect the economic reality of the transaction or the account balance. When you are going for fair value model, the fact is that if you use the cost model, historical cost model, the balances in the balance sheet will not reflect the economic reality of transactions. Correct. So, first of all, the reason behind choosing an accounting policy and going for one model and not the other is basically the idea that we are talking about is faithful representation. What is faithful representation? A faithful representation would represent its economic substance rather than legal form. A perfectly faithful representation would be complete, neutral, free from error. The board note that this is not fully achievable, but that these qualities should be maximized. Board as in IASB. They are saying that it might not always be possible, but the reason for choosing to adopt the fair value model for investment property and not go with the cost model is that when you pick up the fair value model, it leads to more reliable representation of items in the balance sheet. And this faithful representation is what makes that balance sheet more and more reliable and relevant for the users. It enhances the understandability of the financial statements. It also enhances the comparability of financial statements. Now, the point is that financial statements will be comparable within in financial statements of one entity with itself of the previous year, or financial statements of one entity as with another entity. When will this become comparable? This will become comparable because when the accounting policy used by both the entities is the same, or when the company uses the same accounting policy year on year. ठीक है. The reason behind choosing one policy or choosing one model over the other or going for a particular accounting policy is to enhance the reliability of the financial statements by going in for a more faithful representation. ठीक है. And whether faithful representation and comparability are affected by such choices, comparability is definitely affected. Because if Satyamit chooses the cost model and Roshan chooses the fair value model, then naturally the comparability aspect becomes a little difficult to achieve because I cannot compare. See, if he is using the fair value model for investment property, any changes in fair value are credited to P&L, right? In my case, the value of investment property does not reflect the economic reality of the balance right now. So comparing his investment property and my investment property figure would be erroneous. And by that logic, our entire balance sheets by themselves will not remain comparable. So you should write about the importance of comparability, then write about how the financial statements are affected by a choice of policy when offered. Choice of accounting policy, state why is it given in the first place, which is for faithful representation. But we also have to mention that whenever an accounting policy choice is offered, entities might use it or might see that as an opportunity to manipulate the financial statements. Deliberately moving from the cost model to the fair value model, in case where the profits of the company are declining. Imagine karo that you want to portray a pretty picture to investors. Situation one. Or there is a debt covenant. That debt covenant says that if your profit falls below 10% of the total revenue, then you will have to repay the entire loan. That is the debt covenant. Now you are aware of this fact. Here, if my operating profit falls below 10%, for example, or PBT falls below 10%, I'll have to repay the entire loan. Now my regular profits are not reaching that number. So how do I achieve that number? I change the valuation model from cost model to fair value wala approach. And whatever is the change in fair value, I record that through P&L for example, in this case. Now this could be done in order to mislead the users of financial statements. ठीक है. Now, accounting policy choices exist to provide companies which operate under different business models with the option of utilizing an accounting method which best represents their operations. When an accounting standard offers a choice of accounting policy, the conceptual framework states that the information provided must be useful, that is relevant, and a faithful representation of entities' underlying transactions. A faithful representation means that to the maximum extent possible, the financial statements are complete, neutral, and free from error. A faithful representation is affected by the level of measurement uncertainty in the financial statements. Comparability is one of the four qualitative characteristics which enhances the usefulness of financial information. So, the focus of this answer is on emphasizing key the reason why we are giving an accounting policy choice is to make the financial statements more relevant also for the users. Otherwise, if the financial statements are presenting a worn out age old historical data, jiska, like for example, that gold ring which I used to show you, we purchased it for 50, it is now for 150. Showing it at 50 is misleading the users of financial statements. तो उससे अच्छा है दिखाओ ही मत. Don't show any information, right? So that is the idea behind giving you that accounting policy choice, because you want a more faithful representation in the financial statements, and naturally comparability will be affected by that. ठीक है. Now, second part is B1 is discuss the usefulness to the investors of the return on equity ratio and its component parts provided above, and calculate these ratios for the years ended 31st December 2005 and 2006. These calculations should be based upon the information provided in table 1. ठीक है. Guidance companies considering financial results for the year ended 31st of December 2006. The industry places great reliance on the return on equity as an indicator of how well a company uses shareholders' funds to generate a profit. Guidance company analyzes ROE in order to understand the fundamental drivers of value creation. ROE is calculated as net profit before tax upon sales into sales upon assets into assets upon equity. ये जो approach है ना, slightly modified, this becomes the DuPont analysis. सो अगर आपने कभी CFA वगैरह किया तो वहां पे दैट ड्यूपॉन्ट एनालिसिस इज देयर, एंड एग्जैक्टली ऐसा फॉर्मूला नहीं है, इट्स अ लिटिल थोड़े चेंजेस है उसमें, बट दिस इज बेसिकली दैट व्हाट दे आर सेइंग इज कि what is the total return generated on equity. See, अगर आप ऑब्जर्व करो, नेट प्रॉफिट अपॉन सेल्स इनटू सेल्स अपॉन असेट, सेल्स सेल्स कैंसिल, असेट असेट कैंसिल, बचता क्या है, नेट प्रॉफिट बिफोर टैक्स अपॉन इक्विटी बचता है आपके पास. ठीक है. नाउ व्हेन आई टॉक अबाउट रिटर्न ऑन इक्विटी, द आइडिया इज कि whatever is the owner's fund invested in the business, उस पे how much profit or return have you generated. ठीक है. So ये जो actually return on equity का formula है, that should contain profit after tax and preference dividend ideally, but यहाँ पे they have chosen this particular formula, तो we'll not comment on the correctness of the formula. जो दिया है we are going to analyze that. ठीक है. So how effectively are assets used to generate sales, and how much profit is generated out of sales. ठीक है. And out of total equity, how much is assets are funded to what extent by the total equity. This is what the first ratio tells you. Assets are funded to what extent by equity, remaining portion is definitely, that means, funded by debt. Assets are used to generate how much sale, and वो सेल में से कितना नेट प्रॉफिट आया. ठीक है. The following information relates to guidance company for the last 2 years. 2005-2006, net profit before tax, sales, assets, equity. ठीक है. Now, can you do one thing? Can you quickly do this calculation? एक टेबल बनाओ. ठीक है. उसमें 2005-2006, two separate columns. Calculate each ratio and then calculate the return on equity. ठीक है. Do that calculation quickly.
सर
हो
तो
गया?
डायरेक्टली, हाँ हो गया वैसे तो, पर
डायरेक्ट
डायरेक्टली
नहीं
अगर
करना
नेट।
है।
ओके।
डायरेक्ट नहीं करना है। यू नीड द कंपोनेंट्स। आई न्यू शुभ, तू पूछेगा ही 100%।
सर वो
शॉर्टकट।
सामने सामने मतलब कट हो जाता है ना, तो फिर इसलिए पूछा।
अच्छा। हैज मुंबई गॉटन अ लिटिल कोल्डर कि नहीं?
हाँ सर, थोड़ा सा अच्छा है वेदर।
ओके। रोशन, डज चेन्नई एवर फील कोल्ड? Cool rather. Let's not
So
even say cold.
after November and it would be cold till Jan mid.
Because unfortunately, whenever I have been there, it's been peak summer, so it feels
Yes.
torrid. Hot is also not the word, it feels torrid.
Yeah, yeah, it is almost like Mumbai, very high humid. So it's better to visit after either before summer or after summer.
Yeah,
July to November would be a best one.
correct. Guys, हो गया? Shouldn't take so long यार। छोटे छोटे
यस सर।
कैलकुलेशन है, आप 50 मिनट एक कैलकुलेशन पे लगा देते हो।
हाँ सर, हो गया।
हाँ, चलो। नाउ लेट्स लुक एट द कैलकुलेशन कि करना क्या है। ठीक है। सॉरी, नॉट दिस वन। Net profit margin, asset turnover, equity ratio, return on equity 17% and 38%। ठीक है? Is the calculation right?
सर डायरेक्ट में भी यही आंसर आया था।
यस सर।
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
पता है मुझे, बट अरे यहाँ
मैं समझ
पागल
गया
नहीं
सर।
हो ना मिस्टर
हाँ
शाह?
हाँ हाँ।
ये तू पिटने के काम क्यों करता है शुभ?
नहीं नहीं
हाँ?
सर।
मतलब मैं बोल रहा हूँ वो करो, ही सही नहीं, मैं तो वही करूंगा। तो कैमरा ऑन कर शुभ। हाँ। क्यों? ऐसे? ऐसे
आपके
ही
यहाँ हाल है।
जानबूझ के? तू अभी और बच्चा लग रहा है रे।
सर वो शेव कर दिया ना, वो सब मतलब एक डेयर दिया था सब लोग को, तो हम लोग सब बॉयज ने शेव कर दिया ग्रुप में, ऐसा है।
वाह, आई लाइक दैट। चश्मा भी नहीं है। There's a reason why I was asking you to do the three calculations, but Mr. Shah won't listen. Discuss the usefulness to the investors of the ROE ratio and its component parts provided above. So, if you want to discuss the usefulness of component parts, you will have to calculate the component parts, ना? इसीलिए मैंने वो दिया है। ठीक है? Now, whenever a question like this comes, you have to explain what does each ratio try to tell you. ठीक है? The return on equity ratio measures the rate of return which the owners of issued shares of a company receive on their shareholdings in terms of profitability. This metric is especially important from an investor's perspective as it can be used to judge how efficiently the firm will be able to use the shareholders investment to generate additional revenues। ये आपका फर्स्ट जो मेन रेशियो है रिटर्न ऑन इक्विटी, वो आपने डिस्क्राइब कर लिया। ठीक है? They have asked you discuss the usefulness to investors. So with every calculation, how should you phrase? See, you know what is return on equity, you know what is profitability ratio, but what you have to tell is how is it useful for investors. ठीक है? So first paragraph you spoke about the main ratio itself, which is return on equity। ठीक है? And you explained what does it denote and how do investors use this metric। ठीक है? Then the net profit margin tells how much profit a company makes on every dollar worth of sales। If you want, you can add to this key a higher net profit margin means the company is doing better, for example। ठीक है? If you feel the need to, you can compare the ratios here that in the current year it has declined as compared to the preceding year। Asset turnover क्या बताता है? Asset turnover measures the value of a company's sales or revenue generated relative to the carrying amount of asset। The asset turnover ratio can often be used as an indicator of efficiency with which a company is deploying its assets in generating revenue। Now, the asset turnover ratio tells how efficiently are you utilizing the assets in order to generate sales? If you look at the year 2006, your sales were 1.05 times of the asset. Matlab, if you had an asset of 100, sorry, if you had assets of 100, you generated sales of how much? 1.05. In the second year, if you had assets of 100, asset turnover was 0.8, you generated sale of 80. तो आपने क्या अचीव किया? With that particular asset, how much sale were you able to achieve? Naturally, it indicates you were more efficient in 2006 as compared to 2005. And equity ratio indicates the relative proportion of a company's assets that are financed by equity. Equity ratio is a good indicator of the level of leverage. Leverage matlab debt used by a company by measuring the proportion of the total assets which are financed by shareholders as opposed to creditors. ठीक है. So when we talk of return on equity is a combination of all of these. Equity ratio tells you कि say for example मेरा total asset 200 है, ठीक है, and I am saying that 150 is my equity. That means what proportion of my total assets is funded by equity? अब अगर total asset का value 200 है and equity is 150, that means remaining 50 is funded by debt, है ना? So ये ratio, if this ratio falls, ठीक है, if this ratio falls, that indicates, see यहाँ पे 200 upon 150, 1.33. Now what if this falls? Equity becomes 100, then that means out of 200, 100 is funded by equity, 100 is funded by debt. ठीक है. What does this indicate? This indicates that in the second year, the company has resorted to borrowing. Its reliance on borrowed funds is increasing, which might not be a good sign in the long run. So this is what the equity ratio tries to indicate. ठीक है. You explain that, and this will fetch you 6 marks. Just observe कि यार ये क्वेश्चन में 6 मार्क ये फेथफुल रिप्रेजेंटेशन कंपेरेबिलिटी का था, 6 मार्क रेशो कैलकुलेशन एंड एक्सप्लेनिंग इट्स कंपोनेंट पार्ट्स के नॉलेज लेवल टाइप क्वेश्चन है, इसका 5 मार्क था. इफ दिस कम्स इन द पेपर, आई थिंक यू आर ब्लेस्ड. Fair enough, nothing difficult in this one. And discuss the impact that setting up of the SPE and miscellaneous transactions have had on ROE and its component parts. Given these considerations, adjust table 1 and recalculate the ROE for 2006, thereby making it more comparable to the ROE of 2005. अब देखते हैं ये क्या क्वेश्चन है. During the year ended 31st December 2006, Guidance Company stated that it had reorganized its assets and set up SPE. What is SPE? It is a special purpose entity. एक new entity बना लिया. Oftentimes a pension fund can be a special purpose entity कि आपने सारा का सारा जो भी ऑब्लिगेशन था, जो भी प्लान असेट था, वो सारा का सारा एक अलग एंटिटी में पेंशन फंड में सेटअप कर दिया. ठीक है. हियर गाइडेंस कंपनी हैज ट्रांसफर्ड प्रॉपर्टी टू द एसपीई एट इट्स कैरिंग अमाउंट ऑफ 50 million, but had incorrectly charged revaluation reserves with this amount rather than showing the transfer as an investment in SPE. The property was the SPE's only asset. However, guidance company still managed the property, and any profit or loss relating to the assets of the entity was remitted directly to guidance company. Guidance company had no intention of consolidating the SPE. ठीक है. अब what is this question trying to talk about? This question is telling you कि, or rather what they are saying is कि एक separate entity बना लिया जिसमें you transferred all the property. The property is still managed by guidance company. ठीक है. But जैसे ITC company demerged ITC hotels into a separate entity. What they were thinking of is कि यार they might have thought of is कि we have multiple businesses, एक rental वाला business भी है, so let's set it up as a separate entity. We might continue to occupy some of the properties, वो but we want that to become like a separate entity altogether. तो एक separate company incorporate किया, सारा का सारा property उसको transfer कर दिया. ठीक है. It transferred the property at its carrying amount of 50 million. If you're transferring it at 50 million, accounting entry is bank account debit, sorry, receivable account debit to property account, right? 50 million. Whether cash has come in or not at this point, we don't know. If cash has come in, then bank account debit to PPE. If cash has not come in, then receivable account debit to property, plant and equipment. 50 million. PPE should have been credited, but what they did was they incorrectly charged revaluation reserves with this amount, which means instead of crediting property, plant and equipment, they ended up crediting revaluation surplus. ठीक है, error है. So if you have to rectify the error, you have credited revaluation surplus. Should you have credited revaluation surplus? Answer is no. तो reval surplus को debit करना पड़ेगा. You should have credited property. Did you credit property? No. So credit property account. This will be the rectification entry. ठीक है. Now, value of assets transferred to SPE is 50. Transfer happened during the year. ठीक है. अब यहां पे देखो, assets at 31st of December in 2006 were 210. ठीक है. And ideally, what they have, or what is the challenge here? The challenge here is that, see, this 210, by the way, is your closing balance at 31st of December. ठीक है. Now, when you are transferring the asset to this special purpose entity, what you did by mistake is guidance company transferred the property to SPE at its carrying amount of 50 million, but had incorrectly charged reval surplus. The property was the SPE's only asset. Guidance company still managed the property, and any profit or loss relating to assets of the entity was remitted directly to guidance company. Now, although legal ownership of the property has been transferred to the special purpose entity, who has control over this property? Can you tell me?
Guidance.
The guidance.
Guidance
Guidance.
company.
And what makes you believe that? A, they still manage the property. Profit or loss relating to assets gets remitted to them. So, on one hand, what you will do is as a rectification, मतलब what should have come to your mind was कि ये rectification entry है if this part of the information was not given, that it was the only asset, blah blah blah. Then what you would have done is you would have removed the item from your books of accounts. But ideally, you should not have removed the item from your books of accounts. Do you agree? आपने रिमूव कर दिया, but you should not have removed the item from your books of accounts. Why? Because although it is transferred to the other party, I'm sure you will agree with me that this transfer is not a sale. है ना? This transfer is not a sale. You still retain control over that property. तो आपने कम कर दिया आपका PPE balance, but should you have done that? No, you should not have done that. And what happens to my revaluation surplus? Do you agree revaluation surplus is a part of equity? Equity capital नहीं, equity में क्या क्या आता है? Equity capital आता है, retained earnings आता है, reval surplus आता है, fair value adjustment आता है, share premium आता है, सब कुछ आता है. So, what you did by mistake in this particular situation is आपने but had incorrectly charged revaluation surplus reserves with this amount. What do you mean by charged revaluation surplus? मैंने आपको क्या बोला था कि you credited that to revaluation surplus, but we did not pay attention to one word. What is the word that we have used here? They have used the word charged. ये charged word से अपना पूरा analysis change हो जाता है. Why? Revaluation surplus is like a gain, है ना? मतलब P&L में नहीं जाता है, but revaluation surplus is a gain. When I say I charged revaluation surplus, doesn't that mean you debited revaluation surplus with this amount? ये
Yes.
कर दिया ना आपने. मैंने when I first when we first spoke, I said अरे नहीं reval surplus को credit कर दिया था. But that statement was wrong. Why? Because I did not focus on one word, which is charged. Now, this is the kind of mistake that often happens in the paper. What do we think? हमने ये सोचा कि they made a certain type of mistake. In our mind, the entry should have been something, and the entry should have been receivable account debit to SPE account. सॉरी रिसीवेबल अकाउंट डेबिट टू प्रॉपर्टी अकाउंट, एंड देन वी सेड कि नहीं नहीं ये एंट्री नहीं किया, वी सॉ द वर्ड रीवैल्यूएशन सरप्लस, सो वी मेड अप आवर ओन वर्जन ऑफ व्हाट शुड हैव हैपेंड, है ना? व्हाट डिड वी डू? We made up our own version of what should have happened here. They would have credited reval surplus, but they did not credit reval surplus. They charged reval surplus, which means for no rhyme or reason they ended up debiting reval surplus, है ना? They did not credit reval surplus. Charge means वो गेन अकाउंट को उन्होंने डेबिट कर दिया, which is incorrect. वो revaluation surplus को you were not supposed to touch only in the first place, but you ended up touching revaluation surplus. So how do you solve for this situation? You will credit revaluation surplus to rectify the error. अब ये जो ईयर एंड बैलेंस है आपका रिवैल्यू इक्विटी का 100 वाला बैलेंस, ठीक है? हाउ इज दिस 100 अराइव्ड एट? दे हैड इनकरेक्टली चार्ज रिवैल सरप्लस, करेक्ट? They had incorrectly charged reval surplus. 100 is after subtracting 50. So after you rectify, don't you think 100 will become 100 plus 150? That is, यहाँ पे 50 add हो जाएगा in equity. ठीक है? Another point that I want you to make a note of. What we said was guidance company transferred property to PPE at its carrying amount of 50 million. Have they said anywhere that पीपीई अकाउंट वाज नॉट क्रेडिटेड? ऐसा लिखा है कहीं पे? ऑब्जर्व एंड टेल मी, हैव दे रिटन एनीवेयर कि पीपीई वाज नॉट क्रेडिटेड, पीपीई वाज नॉट हैंडल्ड करेक्टली? ऐसा कुछ लिखा है उन्होंने?
नहीं सर।
Sir.
नहीं. Which means when we say that, when we made this assumption कि अरे they should have credited PPE and they did not do it, that statement itself was wrong. Why? Because we did not read the question. A guidance company transferred a property to SPE at its carrying amount, but they incorrectly charged reval reserves with this amount rather than showing the transfer as an investment in SPE. So the entry should have been something else. There was no problem in how you handled PPE account. The only mistake you made was कोई rhyme, without any rhyme or reason you ended up debiting reval surplus, which you shouldn't have. तो ये जो 210 का बैलेंस है, दिस 210 का बैलेंस इज आफ्टर सब्ट्रैक्टिंग 50, है ना? आफ्टर एडजस्टिंग द 50 मिलियन का कैरिंग अमाउंट. यू नाउ नो दैट यू नेवर लॉस्ट कंट्रोल ओवर दैट पर्टिकुलर प्रॉपर्टी. सो यू एड अप 50, ट्रांसफर टू एसपीई में 50 ऐड कर दो इन असेट्स, 50 ऐड कर दो इन इक्विटी. आर यू विथ मी, ऑल ऑफ यू?
यस सर.
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Now you see why it is so important to read the to read the data basically, otherwise आप गलत करके आ जाओगे. ठीक है? ना ये एक गड़बड़ हो गया. Guidance company has bought back 25 million shares of $1 each for 1.2 per share during the year ended 31st of December 2006 for cash and cancelled the shares. This transaction was deemed to be legal. ठीक है? These miscellaneous transactions have been accounted for in the financial information provided for 31st of December 2006. Guidance company purchased a 25% interest in an associate company on 1st of July for cash. The investment had cost 15 million and the associate had made profits of 32 million in the year to 31st of December. Guidance company accounted for the purchase of the associate correctly. अब ये कोई एरर नहीं है. They have done two transactions in the year. One was a buyback of shares, one was an investment in associate. Now understand one thing, when you are comparing ratios of 2 years, it should always be an apple for apple comparison, right? It cannot be comparing apples and oranges, makes no sense. It has to be two comparable things in the first place. What are our two comparable things? 2005 ka profit and 2006 ka profit. Now in 2006 you purchased an associate, so share of investor in post acquisition profit of associate would have been added somewhere here in profit before tax. It was not included in the 2005 ka profit. So if you want to compare 2005 and 2006, don't you agree that ये profit में से I should remove the share of investor in post acquisition profit of associate? Otherwise that comparability is not possible. Tell me, what is the share of investor in post acquisition profit of associate?
8 million.
4 million.
2 million into 25% profits during the 32 million is profit during the year. You acquired guidance company acquired 25% interest for cash on 1st of July. ठीक है, तो 6 months का ही है पोस्ट एक्विजिशन पीरियड. 32 इंटू 6/12 करो. ठीक है, दैट इज 16 million इंटू 25% इज 4 million.
4 million.
ठीक है, तो 4 million was included in the whatever PAT PBT calculation that you had done. ठीक है, एंड इन कंसोलिडेटेड रिटेन्ड अर्निंग्स डोंट यू ऐड शेयर ऑफ इन्वेस्टर इन पोस्ट एक्विजिशन प्रॉफिट ऑफ एसोसिएट.
Yes, sir.
रिटेन्ड अर्निंग्स कहाँ पे एडेड है? रिटेन्ड अर्निंग्स इज अ पार्ट ऑफ इक्विटी. दिस कंटेन्स शेयर ऑफ इन्वेस्टर इन पोस्ट एक्विजिशन प्रॉफिट ऑफ एसोसिएट. डेटा को कंपेरेबल बनाना है. लास्ट ईयर इट वाजंट देयर, करंट ईयर इट इज देयर. सब्ट्रैक्ट द वैल्यू फ्रॉम करंट ईयर. ठीक है, यहां पे नेट प्रॉफिट से सब्ट्रैक्ट 4, यहां से सब्ट्रैक्ट 4. ठीक है, आर यू विथ मी?
Yes, sir.
यस
Yes, sir.
मिस्टर.
सर ये लास्ट जो आपने एसोसिएट वाला बोला एक बार रिपीट करेंगे?
वो रिटेन्ड अर्निंग्स वाला.
हाँ, जो आपने बोला माइनस करने का, मुझे फर्स्ट वाला समझ गया कि भाई अपना जो प्रॉफिट हुआ है वो इक्वल करने के लिए हम माइनस करेंगे 4 million.
करेक्ट.
तो वो तो हम सबसे पहले अपने प्रॉफिट बिफोर टैक्स में से माइनस करेंगे. एक
करेक्ट.
दूसरा हम उसको रिटेन अर्निंग्स में ऐड करते हैं क्योंकि
हाँ,
हाँ
दैट
पोस्ट
हो चुका
एक्विजिशन
है.
प्रॉफिट है वो, तो इसलिए वहां से भी माइनस करेंगे,
करेक्ट.
बराबर ना?
करेक्ट.
हाँ.
सो वो ऐड हो चुका है, हम उसको बस रेक्टिफाई कर रहे हैं. ठीक है, दिस इज इशू 2, इशू 3. ठीक है, अब थर्ड. अच्छा, ये पॉइंट है अबाउट बायबैक. 1 फेस वैल्यू का शेयर आपने बायबैक किया बाय पेइंग 1.2 ड्यूरिंग द ईयर, है ना? सो व्हाट विल बी द अकाउंटिंग एंट्री? बायबैक हैपेंड दिस ईयर, देयर वाज नो बायबैक लास्ट ईयर. लास्ट ईयर के डेटा में बायबैक नहीं था, करंट ईयर में देयर इज अ बायबैक. What entry would you have passed in the books of accounts? You would have see, when you are buying back equity shares, that means your obligation towards equity shareholders is ending to that extent. So equity share capital is debited 25 million into 1, bank account is credited 25 into 1.2, and other components of equity is debited with 5, the difference, है ना? द वैल्यू इन दिस टेबल आर ईयर एंड वैल्यूज. ये जो वैल्यूज आपको दिए हैं 220, 210, 100, 38, दीज आर ईयर एंड वैल्यूज. ईयर एंड वैल्यूज मतलब these are values that were arrived at after considering the impact of the above entries. ठीक है, now to make it compare, see last year buyback नहीं हुआ था, current year में buyback हो गया. तो if you want to make the data comparable, ठीक है, आपने क्या कर दिया? what you have done is you have said कि यार मेरा equity value जो है, that equity value is after the uh, after all the adjustments have happened during the year. Now, ideally, the point is, uh, should you be adjust? So the question that we are faced with is कि यार अगर अपने को डेटा को कंपेयर करना है, ठीक है, if we have to compare the data, then the values in the current year and the values in the last year have to be comparable ना. अब last year में तो बायबैक हुआ ही नहीं था, current year में बायबैक has happened. Now equity without buyback you are comparing with equity after buyback, so that comparison itself is not appropriate, right? And if that comparison is not appropriate, तो आपको क्या करना पड़ेगा? You will have to now make sure that you rectify that particular calculation. कैसे rectify करेंगे? See, this is, there is no rectification entry per se that you are recording, but understand one thing, कि while arriving at this balance of 100, 30 was subtracted. ठीक है, while arriving at this value of 100, 30 was subtracted. You have to make it comparable with the previous year. यहाँ पे 30 ऐड कर दो. ठीक है, and bank balance also got reduced. For what reason? The asset balance got reduced because of the buyback. So to rectify that, add up 30 here, and these are your updated values. ठीक है, and this is what was the expectation? The expectation was discuss the impact that setting up the SPE and miscellaneous transactions would have had on ROE and its component parts. Given these considerations, adjust table 1 and recalculate the ROE for 2006. Now that recalculation you can do, and after that the data will be more comparable. Yes, Yashika.
Sir, in 20x6, the assets also include investment in associates of 15 plus 4, 19 million. तो हम उसको reduce नहीं करेंगे?
Reduce, देखो, when you for entry for investment in the SPE should have been investment in SPE account debit to non current asset account. ठीक है, ये एंट्री होना चाहिए था. आपने क्या एंट्री करके रखा है? आपने एंट्री करके रखा है रिवैल्यूएशन रिजर्व अकाउंट डेबिट टू नॉन करंट असेट अकाउंट. You see the problem? The way we used to do that in 11th standard rectification entries. Read the situation once again. What is the situation? That property was transferred, but it was incorrectly charged to revaluation reserves rather than showing it as an investment in SPE. The entry should have been investment in SPE account debit to non-current asset. This is what should have been. But ये तो हुआ ही नहीं ना. Did this happen?
Sir, I was asking about investments in associates.
Investment in associate. Guidance company purchased a 25% interest in associate for cash, and okay, you are saying that it was not included in the assets of the previous year and you want to make it comparable.
Yes, sir.
What do the others have to say about that?
Sir, net to net, it would be same because like cash is going out and then we are debiting the bank, I mean like the investment in associates.
So if we were to disregard the investment in associate of whatever 15 million that we have done, investment in associate ka what is the entry? In this case, cash has been paid. So investment in associate account debit to bank account. Now, if you want to disregard the impact of this transaction, what you will do is बैंक अकाउंट डेबिट टू इन्वेस्टमेंट इन एसोसिएट. तो एक असेट कम होगा, एक असेट इंक्रीज होगा, नेट ऑफ हो जाएगा. सो योर पॉइंट इज राइट, यू आर नॉट रॉन्ग, बट द नेट इफेक्ट ऑफ दैट इज जीरो. मेक्स
Okay, sir. Yes, sir.
यस मिस्टर शाह, यू हैड
तो
समथिंग.
तो प्रॉफिट्स में से भी हम जो 4 मिलियन है वो भी माइनस किया है ना उसमें हम लोग
हाँ,
ने.
किया ना, देखो.
हम्म.
ठीक है.
हाँ सर.
एंड देन ROE you can calculate. You see, such a different question ना, 12 marks वाला सब part. Now, there are rare cases in SBR, where we are like, यार कौन सा standard apply किया, क्या किया, समझ में ही नहीं आ रहा है. That does happen sometimes because there is no specific standard that you applied here. You just went with your understanding of the concept. You read that and you're like, इसको अभी let's develop. ठीक है. So that was this guidance company question. Anything that you want to ask?
सर
So
वो
one
One moment. Yes, tell me. Someone was saying something. कुछ पूछ रहा था ना कोई?
yes sir.
बोलो.
Sir, after calculating that ROE, updated ROE, then we also have to give some explanation about the changes or just the calculation.
Just mention the fact that after adjusting, what is the impact? Has it gone up? Has it gone down? उतना करके छोड़ दो. That is enough.
Okay sir.
ठीक है?
सर, जब हम एसोसिएट्स में इन्वेस्टमेंट करेंगे तो हम एंट्री करेंगे इन्वेस्टमेंट्स इन एसोसिएट्स टू बैंक. फिर हम एट द एंड ऑफ द ईयर हमारा होगा इन्वेस्टमेंट्स इन एसोसिएट टू प्रॉफिट 4 मिलियन.
Correct.
तो वो 4 मिलियन इन्वेस्ट असेट से माइनस नहीं होगा इन 20x6 में.
So see, it goes to two places ना. देखो यहाँ पे you have adjusted the see, where did the profit go? On one hand, the profit did get added to जो net profit का आपका figure था, it was included there, right? Second part, that amount straight away went to your consolidated retained earnings. ठीक है. When it got added to consolidated retained earnings, तो वहां से भी अपने को remove करना पड़ा. Now, your point is, why does the 4 not get adjusted in the asset amount? Is that the question?
Yes, sir.
Who can answer that? Should it be included or should it not be included?
एक्सेप्ट जनरली हम इन्वेस्टमेंट इन एसोसिएट निकालते वक्त तो प्रॉफिट ऐड ही करते हैं।
Okay.
हाँ
The
तो
thing is, was it included here in the figure of 210? That is my question.
Yes, sir.
So should we adjust? What do you say?
सर एज पर हम लोग जैसे करते हैं इक्विटी अकाउंटिंग में, तो हमेशा प्रॉफिट्स होते हैं वो वहां पे एसेट्स में ऐड कर देते हैं, तो एडजस्ट करना चाहिए सर।
Okay. Acceptable adjustment. But हाँ, don't, ये ट्रिपल इफेक्ट नहीं है, हाँ, प्लीज अंडरस्टैंड, डबल इफेक्ट ही है। व्हेन इट इज गेटिंग सब्ट्रैक्टेड फ्रॉम नेट प्रॉफिट, वो नेट प्रॉफिट बिफोर टैक्स आके कहाँ पे ऐड हो रहा है? इक्विटी में ऐड हो रहा है ना। बट यू हैड अर्लियर यू हैड एडेड फुल 38 का प्रॉफिट, नाउ यू आर जस्ट रेक्टिफाइंग दैट। ये तीन इफेक्ट नहीं है, प्लीज डोंट गेट दैट आइडिया इन योर हेड कि मैंने तीन इफेक्ट दे दिया। इट्स जस्ट दिस प्रॉफिट गॉट एडेड हियर, तो आई हैड टू शो द रेक्टिफिकेशन इम्पैक्ट हियर ऑल्सो। ठीक है?
ओके सर।
इज एवरीवन विथ मी?
यस सर।
यस सर।
ओके, चलो।